Welcome to Best Ever, the show where we explore how effective self-management creates the foundation for positive leadership outcomes. I'm Scott Eblin, and in every episode, I sit down with notable leaders to uncover the routines, mindset shifts, and strategies that have helped them lead at the highest level, and the difference that's made for their organizations, families, and communities. Today, I'm talking with Craig Mullaney, a former Army Airborne Ranger, a Rhodes Scholar, and a New York Times bestselling author of The Unforgiving Minute, A Soldier's Education. Craig has led troops in combat, taught at the U.S. Naval Academy, advised top government officials on national security, and played key roles in tech giants like Meta and Coherent. He's someone with a wide breadth of leadership experience as a practitioner, teacher, and advisor. We're going to tap into all of Craig's experience to get his insights on the connection between effective self-management and positive leadership outcomes today on Best Ever. So Craig, welcome. I am excited to have you here. Very, very excited to have you here. I've known you. We're not best friends, but we've known each other for a number of years. And I guess several years ago, I interviewed for Fast Company magazine. You gave me some great insights on how to conduct an after-action review and how the Army does that and how that can apply to corporate world. But that actually gets into the first question I wanted to ask you, which there's so much that can be said about your career and accomplishments. Craig, you're an Army Ranger, a Rhodes Scholar, a New York Times bestselling author, former Fortune 500 executive, strategic advisor to top executives. I mean, that just scratches the surface, basically. I'm really curious, like when you're meeting for someone for the first time, like at a cocktail party, and they ask you to tell them about yourself, how do you summarize all that? Like, what do you say?
I don't know. I start with the more relatable things, like I live in Maryland. I'm a father of 4 kids. I work in technology, and in my spare time, I like to play the guitar and learning piano and
yeah. Do you ever get to the other stuff? And if you get to the other stuff, how do you get there? How does that come up?
Well, usually the hardest question is like, oh, tell me about your career, and then I have to be like, okay, it's I've had a nonlinear career path. I began in public service in the Army and in government, and then transitioned into tech roles. And I've been in the small startup tech companies up to large, one of the largest public technology companies, and now I'm somewhere in between, helping grow a medium-sized technology company that you never heard of, but is really important to modern life.
And I'll just say, for anybody not watching on YouTube, you are repping the brand today with your Coherent sweater vest, I guess. Tell us a little bit about what Coherent does and what's your role at Coherent these days.
Yeah. I'm a chief of staff to our CEO, Jim Anderson. And Coherent is probably a company you've never heard of, but we're the world's largest photonics company, which means we are the masters of the photon, the sort of particle of light. And it's a really magical physical element that is central to the way we communicate. We can shape light to cut materials and transform materials. There's about 400 of our lasers and most smartphones. So if you do sort of facial recognition, modern banking, there's a whole array of lasers that's scanning your face. We've had eye surgery, a loved one who's had any sort of degenerative, brain disease. It's Coherent lasers that do sort of the 3-dimensional microscopy to look at a neuron and try to understand, how we treat those diseases better.
All right. So that's pretty amazing. I mean, so you're a lot of things, but I'm pretty sure you're not an electrical engineer. And
No.
I'm pretty sure you're not a particle physicist. How did you get this job at Coherent? I think the last thing you were doing, if I remember right, you were at Brunswick Advisors, right? As an advisor, as the title would suggest, to CEOs and managing their presence on social media and elsewhere. Is that right? You did the same thing at Meta. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, helping companies and their leaders navigate transformational moments for their company. So it's often a crisis, understanding who your stakeholders are, whether they're investors, employees, the communities companies are in. And As I love technology, and I've worked with a number of technology companies, inside technology companies, because apart from policy, I think it's the other main lever that changes the world.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So how did you end up at Coherent? What was the path from Brunswick to being the chief of staff in this master of photons company?
Well, it's actually it's a path goes back to Rhode Island. So, like, I grew up in Rhode Island, and I went to one of the Catholic schools in Rhode Island that's sort of well known for its sports success. And there's another high school, our rival, LaSalle Academy, and the previous CEO of Coherent went to that school. And my wife met Chuck Matera, the previous CEO, and said, "Hey, any chance you're from Rhode Island?" And he said, "How'd you know?" I said, "Oh, you've got the same accent as my in-laws."
Uh-huh.
He said, "Oh yeah." Then they got to talking. He said, "I'd love to meet your husband one day." We started speaking, and it was, there was an opportunity to help the company creating a chief of staff role for the first time.
Okay. So I'm gonna want to, in a minute, I want to get to kind of where it began for you in your adult years, your Army career, and talk about that a little bit. But before we go there, I mean, again, we've sort of talked about this from the jump. You've done so many different things in so many different fields at still a relatively young age. You're not even 50 yet, right?
Nope.
Yeah, and
Knock on
so
wood.
yeah, you'll get there. I'm sure you're really healthy. But the premise of Best Ever of this show is that there's this inextricable connection, between the way you manage yourself and the quality of your leadership outcomes, not just at work, but at home and in the broader community, however you define that. And I'm curious for you, you're a really thoughtful, intentional person. What are the characteristics that you're shooting for when you're in your unique version of peak performance mode?
Mm.
What's the short list for you, like when you're really in the zone?
Being well rested is super important to me. And I've been on both ends of that spectrum. So one of the things they do in Ranger School to try to induce the stress level you might have in a combat situation is to deprive you of both sleep and calories. And so over the course of anywhere from 60 to 100 plus days of Ranger School, you're averaging 3 hours of sleep a night. You can see in the other Rangers the extreme deterioration of performance, physical performance and mental performance, as you take away sleep, and you observe it in yourself. And, the takeaways are you can go a lot further than you think you can, and you can push a team much further than you think you can. But there are limits, and there are real detrimental effects to not being well rested. And that really hit home. That really hit home for me. And in my experience taking troops to Afghanistan, and in my early army career, I knew that, like, we would be at our best performance if we were well rested. So it is very rare for me to have a night without 7 to 8 hours of sleep.
That's the recommended minimum of 7 hours. Yeah.
Now there are times when you have to burn the proverbial midnight oil.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Even in a crisis situation, I'll usually find a way to
Go for 7. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So well rested. What else is, when you're in peak performance mode, what else?
Exercise is really important to me, so I
Yeah.
exercise most days of the week. I'm just not in as good a mood if I'm not
Mm-hmm.
if I don't get my exercise in. It's it's a stress relief. It's another area where I do some goal setting. I don't have as much of a social element to my exercise as I had when I was younger. So I miss that, being part of a team, nutrition, those, I guess those are some of the basics.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Are there characteristics that you have found are representative of you? I mean, those are some routines that you do to put yourself in peak performance zone. What are there characteristics that best describe you when you're there? Have you thought about that?
Focused,
Mm-hmm.
present, creative, long-sighted.
Long-sighted, I mean, taking the long view, kind of bigger picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, finding the right balance of give and take in a conversation or a group sort of collaborative session. I think when I'm not so well rested, I'm not at peak performance, I'm much less patient. And when I'm impatient and I want to get to the answer right away, and you sort of skip the solution discovery process, that can sort of like push away what might be an unexpected and good idea and better path forward. And also, it turns off your colleagues if you're dismissive, or you come in with all the answers and you put them in execution mode rather than partner mode.
Yeah, very good. Pretty consistent from arena to arena, work, home, community, in terms of focused and present and partnering mode and things you mentioned.
You started the question with, like, when you're at your peak.
Yeah.
Like everyone, I'm not always at my peak. I certainly, I struggle, like a lot of people, with being as present as I would like to be outside of a work setting. Putting the phone away, just shifting into that, home zone from the work zone. I'm working from home. I'm working remotely today. It's it takes more effort to, like, close the door to my office and put work aside. Particularly, I work for a company in California, so my 9 p.m. is the end of the workday in California.
Right. Yeah. So I want to go back a little bit, way before California and what you're doing today. If my math is right, it's been about 24 years since you led the platoon in Afghanistan. Is that right?
It's it's 2003, so 22 years.
22 years. Okay, 22 years. So you, as I mentioned earlier, you've written a New York Times bestselling book on that experience. I think it came out in 2009 or thereabouts, called The Unforgiving Minute, A Soldier's Education. Is that the subtitle? Yeah, very good. And that book, it's a great book. I read it several years ago, recommended to everyone. And it culminates in a deadly firefight that you led your platoon in. You lost some men, and extreme pressure. Maybe share a little bit about that experience? And I'm particularly interested in hearing about, what did you learn from that experience 22 years ago that still informs your approach to self-management and leadership 2 decades later?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
Maybe let's set the scene a bit for the for those who haven't read the book, and try not to give away the all the suspense. But yes, we were involved in about a 12-hour firefight on the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, where our unit had been ambushed by some combination of Al Qaeda, Taliban, quote unquote bad guys. We responded to that ambush. You sort of fought back. Ultimately, the other guys had a much worse day than we did. But one of my soldiers, Evan O'Neill, was a private first class from outside of Boston, was killed in that firefight. It really rattled our platoon. And, of course, it was the first casualty that we'd had in Afghanistan for our company. He was well liked in the platoon. And what, seemed to be going through the minds of, all of us who were involved, were that, what could I have done differently? The, survivor's guilt of, why him and not me? Some degree of fear, whether expressed or not, about going back out on the trail, going on the next mission. So you're processing all that grief and emotion, and second guessing, but it's, you don't have a pause button in combat. Like the hits just keep coming. It's, we were back out in another difficult firefight, just days later. It took several years and the writing of the book for me to start to process that experience. I mean, the totality of the experiences I had in Afghanistan and in my military training. And I think one of the changes I had to make in the way that I thought was a really bad assumption that as a leader, you're in control. I'm sure there are instances where leaders can control all the variables and are completely culpable for the outcome, but combat is a complex system. The enemy has a vote. There are many variables that are outside of your control. Most of the variables are outside of your control. That's not to say that you can't do everything in your power to prepare and to make the best decisions in the moment and to train and develop a great team. But to hold oneself accountable entirely, that's sort of like a path to, really being sort of paralyzed and unable to make decisions, because you never have perfect information. You don't control all the variables. You've got to make the best call you can. And sometimes it's not going to work. And sometimes it's not going to work out the way you want.
Sure. It seems like there's a process, I would guess there's a process of acceptance, accepting that fact. I mean, is that part of the journey in your experience?
Yeah, I think it's an acceptance, and it's the acceptance of your fallibility and imperfection and need for grace.
You talked about, combat is the ultimate unique experience, I would imagine. I haven't experienced it myself. And, but you've been an advisor to a lot of executives who maybe feel like they're in combat, even though the comparison is a weak comparison. How do you advise them on what they can control and what they can't, and to come to terms with that, to lead from an appropriate stance, given what they can and can't control?
I don't know, maybe the closest parallel is when you're in a sort of a crisis scenario as in an organization. You've lost a major customer, there's an emergency in a plant. It's easier in a business context than in a combat context to take some of the emotion out of the situation. For one, you're not usually physically in peril. When you're in the center of the storm, it's not particularly helpful to do a root analysis of how you got to the center of the storm. It's that having that sense of presence, that we are where we are. We need to appreciate the moment that we're in right now, but it's about how you move forward. And the most helpful analysis in the middle of a crisis is about what your options are and the sort of the branch and sequels of those options. And to leave the Monday morning quarterbacking, to leave the after action review until the crisis has passed.
Let's not try to do the blame game in the middle of it, right? Yeah.
And when you're an outside advisor, you're not inside the organization. You're never totally inside the fold. I think where I have been value add to the team, or where I've gotten positive feedback, is you stay calm and collected. You can apply cold analysis to the options with a positive but not a foolhardy attitude. And that's really grounding for a team that feels like the ground has been, is not certain underneath them.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, and we had a little laugh about not being a particle physicist or an electrical engineer and working at the Photon Masters, Coherent. So as you mentioned, you're the chief of staff and the strategic advisor to your CEO, Jim. What's his last name again?
Anderson.
Anderson, right? At Coherent. And what have you learned about how to lead and add value? You said you love technology, but you're not really a technologist yourself. What have you learned how to about leading and adding value in a highly technical organization like Coherent when you're not the subject matter expert? How do you? I think some of the stuff you just said probably leads to that, but what is it exactly?
There's a value for generalists and highly specific and technical environments, and being able to communicate across domains of expertise and understand across domains of expertise. I also think it's being a good advisor or chief of staff isn't necessarily about having all the answers. It's mostly about how do you ask the right questions, and how do you get answers and actions out of a team. Which players need to be involved in this issue. What does a project plan look like to get this done? How do we translate something that's super complex and technical? How do we find the essence of the issue and be able to communicate it to our investors or customer or even our employees? It doesn't require a PhD in engineering. It helps if you're interested in the topic, which I'm very interested in. I spend a lot of time, talking to our CTO, our head of our different business divisions, and they're very patient at explaining, complex ideas and technical issues. But I've also, at this point in my career, I'm confident in what value I can add to the conversation.
How do you summarize it? What's in the length of what used to be called a tweet? I guess it still is. How do you summarize your value at Coherent?
A typical a typical org chart for CEO has one CEO at the center, and then everyone's connected to them by a solid line.
Yeah.
And then great chief of staff is takes that hub and spoke model and connects all the spokes together.
Okay, I love that. That's a great visual. I could see you visualizing that while you're formulating the answer. Actually, yeah. I'll rewind it to Facebook and probably some comparable work you did at Brunswick. I think I met you first when you were still at Facebook, and my recollection is you were the guy at Facebook who advised major public figures. I think Bill Clinton comes to mind on how to use Facebook to get their message out. This was when people were still figuring it out, right? Did I have that right? That's what you did there?
Yeah, I don't think I ever advised Bill Clinton.
Okay.
Per se, but, yeah, there are a number of folks. There used to be a number of folks at Facebook that were the interface between all the company's products, Instagram, Facebook, etc.
Yeah.
And public figures, and helping them sort of adapt to a new world of influence.
Right. That's a really apt way to frame it, a new world of influence, which has become a pretty fraught environment, moving at extremely rapid speed and can get pretty nasty pretty quickly. How do you summarize your counsel, putting your old hat on? How do you summarize your counsel to leaders who want to put their best foot forward when they engage online?
Start small. So, you don't expect to come out the gates as the next influencer with 3 million followers and pitch perfect content. So you got to start somewhere, and don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Is to get help. So whether that's a reverse mentorship arrangement, or maybe a younger person on staff who's a digital native or social media native, help them help you express your voice through a medium that maybe you're not so comfortable with. I guess 3, be consistent. So, seen lots of examples that don't where someone starts by posting daily for 2 weeks and then disappears.
Ran out of gas, yeah.
And run out of gas. So, pick your pace, start slow, and just, it's like exercise, I guess. Don't, you're not going to come out and run a marathon. You start running a mile every couple of days, and then you build up over time.
Yeah.
And I guess the last part is think of it as a conversation, a community, not as a bullhorn. A one-way speech.
Mm-hmm. So receive as much as you transmit. Does that?
Yeah, well, what happens in the comments and your engagement with your community is, it's really important, and that draws people in.
Yeah. Any advice about keeping your cool under pressure on social media? Because there's a lot of trolls out there.
Yeah, that's I think it was like President Lincoln who had this habit of when he wanted to write a really nasty reply, he'd write the letter and then put it in a drawer to send the next day.
Yeah, I love that story.
You got to find the 21st century equivalent of that for you. So I always schedule my posts. I will, if I'm upset about something, I'll vent about it in a different environment that's not part of the permanent record.
Yeah. Yeah, you're a top voice on LinkedIn, I think, right? Designated top voice. Yeah. How long have you been on LinkedIn actively, and what do you? What's your personal strategy there?
I don't know when I started at LinkedIn, and I think LinkedIn is older than Facebook.
I think it is actually, yeah.
So, I mean, as long as I can remember being, I guess, professionally engaged, at least since I left the Army, I've been using LinkedIn.
What's your goal there? What do you hope to do? What have you done? What do you hope to do through your presence on LinkedIn?
I mean, it's a way I stay connected to my extended professional network. It's 3 of the most satisfying years of my professional life were teaching at the Naval Academy, and I love teaching. And there is a huge audience of younger people who are just hungry for advice and wisdom. I don't know that I have much wisdom, but I have, free advice. And it is LinkedIn is a place where I can, share what I think are takeaways from my career. I love when I hear from younger folks on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Like 2 days ago, I got a really long letter in the form of a LinkedIn message from someone who'd read my book, and where it had changed their whole life. Like they read it, they decided to pursue military service. And that is, anyone who's written a book knows how satisfying it is when, someone has not just sort of read your book, but it's had a real impact on them. Because it is.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. I have to confess, one of my favorite things is when I do a speaking engagement or a leadership workshop based on my next level book, and somebody comes up to me and they bring it in. It's got all kinds of Post-it note tabs in it, and they'll show it to me. Look at all the tabs, look at all the highlights I've made. I was like, oh my God, yeah, I got one. Yeah, totally. I love the fact that you brought up the young people that you hope you're reaching and helping, with your free advice on LinkedIn, because that's a good pivot to, I want to get a little bit more personal with you. So some of the things we haven't talked about with your history as a kid, you were a wrestler and pretty committed to wrestling. You went to West Point. I don't think we've mentioned that yet. At West Point, you remember the sport parachute team. And how many jumps did you make as a member of the sport parachute team?
About 450.
That's what I read. Yeah, 450. At Oxford, as a Rhodes Scholar, you earned not just one master's degree, but 2 in your time there. And if I remember correctly, you completed Army Ranger School with a dislocated shoulder. Is that right?
Yes. I dislocated my shoulder multiple times during Ranger School, and paid the price.
Yeah. Okay. But you finished. That's the point. And so,
I did finish. I
So
got 3.
I'm going to make an unprofessional diagnosis. You are a driven individual. That's a lot of drive, no matter how you slice it, wrestler, West Point, parachute, 450 jumps, all that, dislocated shoulder, Ranger School. Where's that come from, that drive? Are you born with it? Has it developed over the years? How's it changed over the years? Just tell me about the engine that keeps moving you forward.
I mean, it's probably a better question for my mother. I think she'd
Yeah.
say that I was, there's a certain element of being born with that drive, like always looking for a challenge. It's part of my DNA. I like to find hard things, keep me interested and motivate me. Whether they are in the public domain or not.
There's a really interesting column in the New York Times this morning as we record this in March of 2025 about physiogenics. I think that's the name. Have you heard that term before? It's this new field where it's taking on the question: is it nature or is it nurture? The answer is it's both. You have the genetic disposition somewhere in your markers. There's a genetic disposition in your case to be driven, and then it's reinforced by your mother, maybe, or the environmental factors. You kind of self-select into environments where it is reinforced. Is sort of the premise of as I understand it from the article.
Right. So part of it's nature, and I can see it in my siblings. So there's got to be something to that coincidence. But it's also all the people along the way in my path who have pushed me, coached me, pulled me up, advised me. Like Mr. Grandchamp was one of my wrestling coaches when I was a little kid. My high school history and religious studies teachers who really pushed me, pushed me intellectually. All of the mentors at West Point, my parents and the example that they set for hard work. So I don't take any of that. I don't take any of that for granted. I'm not a believer in the, like, I don't think people pull themselves up by the bootstraps. There's a lot of people who push you along the way.
Yeah, for sure. Is the drive 100% beneficial, or are there downsides to it?
Yes, there are downsides. Like, if my wife would say I'm fundamentally unable to like relax, like fully relax. I, try to go on a beach vacation and lay down on a chair and, I'll turn it into like, well, I've got to finish a book, this week while I have this time, or, um, you know, sh- surely I can optimize this vacation with just the right activities and find the right restaurants to go to and so forth. And, I think my kids sometimes would like it if I was just, dad and not always, um, pushing that, pushing them to,
Yeah.
expand their boundaries.
You guys have 4 kids, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
4 boys,
What's the 8 boys? Wow. What's the age range?
14, 12, 10, and 4.
Okay. Pretty active household then.
Very active.
I want to talk a little bit before we wrap up in the next 10 minutes or so about, I guess, for lack of a better term, your personal training plan. I'm a big believer that the routines that we have in our life have a big impact on how we show up, and some version of peak performance. Ideally, we're not always there, like you said earlier. So four domains: physical. We've talked a little bit about the sleep and nutrition and exercise, but also I think there are probably mental routines, relational routines. You mentioned your family, your wife, and your boys. Spiritual routines, however you want to define spiritual. What stands out for you in your training program, and what's really helped beyond the physical routines that you mentioned? What else is helping you be the guy you want to be the leader you want to be, all the above?
I mean, my faith.
Yeah.
Being a part of, I'm a member of All Saints Church nearby in Chevy Chase, and that's a really important community and source of strength and encouragement for me, and it's gotten me through the darkest periods, and is a venue where I can lift up other people, and so that's a frequent destination for me and our family.
So it sounds like the community aspect of that is really vital for you.
The community, the daily, to the degree I like, daily prayer is important. I don't always hit the mark.
Yeah, but I was talking to somebody earlier this week. Daily prayer would be the 100% goal, but if you miss a couple of days and you still hit 5, that's better than none, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, family, both time together as a group, and then I really, really have come to value the time I spend one-on-one with each of my children.
Really?
Time with my siblings, time with my mother, with Tomoko. I think your spouse is the most important relationship in that equation.
Yeah. What do you and Tomoko do with each other? Like, do you have a date night, or what? How does it work for the two of you, just to stay connected as husband and wife, and not just mom and dad?
Yeah, we usually end every day talking to each other. Probably once a week we get out together somewhere, usually for a meal or a coffee or a walk. We like to go to comedy shows when great comedians come through the Kennedy Center. I love going to concerts, and so I'll drag Tomoko to concerts, even if she doesn't love the band.
Okay, so let me stop you for a second. Favorite comedian and best most recent concert?
I like Jon Stewart is my favorite comedian.
Yeah.
And John Oliver is probably a close second.
Okay, closely related. Yeah.
Yeah. And then with a favorite music venue?
Yeah, best concert you've been to lately. Best band, best performer musically.
Yeah. I saw the Rolling Stones at Levi's Stadium.
I did too. I saw them at Mile High on our anniversary last year. Did you like it?
That was spectacular.
Yeah.
If that doesn't motivate you, if an 80-year-old can get on stage and rock for 2 hours.
It was nonstop. Mick Jagger was nonstop in that show. It was awesome. Yeah. And Keith Richards was a little more stationary, but he's up there. Yeah. It was awesome. So you mentioned guitar, and then you also mentioned piano. You had a great post on LinkedIn a year or so ago about, within the last year, I think, about playing piano at a recital. And I think it was you and other kids at the recital, right? I mean, it wasn't like other kids. You're not a kid. You and some kids at the recital.
Every kid got up and introduced themselves saying, like, I'm 5 years old and I'm going to play Beethoven, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I'm Craig Mullaney, and I'm 46, and I'll be playing riff for you.
What got you into piano at age 46? That's a tough ask.
So, one, my kids were playing piano. 2, in part because they were playing, we bought a piano which sits 10 feet outside of my office door. And 3, I love listening to piano and classical music, but I never had any music education, beyond what they teach you in a classroom growing up. So I wanted to learn. I wanted to explore this domain where I appreciated listening, but I never made any of my own music. And it's humbling trying to learn any instrument in your 40s, because your fingers and your brain are not connected as easily as it is when you're a little kid. 2, like music theory, I actually find pretty hard.
Yeah, it is.
But it has like opened up like all these layers of appreciating music that I didn't fathom before. And there's like so much more that I can learn. So,
are you still playing guitar?
Yeah, I've got my guitar.
What do you got?
Feet away from me.
You want to go grab it and put it on camera? What is it?
This is just a Fender Stratocaster.
I got a Strat. I love that's a beautiful Strat. That's a beautiful Strat. Yeah, awesome. So while we're still on camera, maybe the listeners who want to geek out on music might care about this. Have you found Rick Beato, I think it is, on YouTube?
No.
Beato. He's a music producer, can play anything, and he is breaking down the music theory of rock, basically.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, look him up. You will love it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you'll love it. It's great. So let's get it. I know we got a hard stop here, so let's wrap it up. I want to come back to two things before we go, and then one last question that I think will be totally spot on based on what we were just talking about with the music. At home with you and Tamako with the four sons from 4 to 14. What's your view on the role of leadership in raising happy and successful human beings?
It's a sort of an indirect response.
Yeah.
At the infantry officer basic school in Fort Benning, Georgia, is a statue of an infantryman with his arm back like this, and it just says, "Follow me." Right. And so like if you get one thing right, it's modeling the behavior you want from the people following you. And that is a really difficult challenge as a parent, and to do so consistently, because your children see who you really are, flaws and all. And certainly once they get to 12 and 14, they let you know all of those flaws.
Mm-hmm.
But, to sort of consistently try to demonstrate the character traits I would like them to embody, it keeps me motivated and young.
You mentioned a one-on-one time. Is that something you think about one-on-one with them?
Yeah, I mean, I try to let them guide what we do with our one-on-one time, and chance for, and sometimes they're like no words exchanged. It's just doing an activity together, playing guitar with my 14-year-old, or going for a hike with one of the other kids. It's just a chance to be sort of in that one-on-one relationship with each other.
It's pretty
Closely.
Fascinating how different, in your case, 4 kids, in our case, 2 kids, who came from the same set of parents, how different they can be from each other, isn't it?
Yeah, thank God.
Well, not so much different from the parents, but different from each other. Haven't you found that your
Absolutely.
4 boys are each unique in their personalities? And I love the idea that you're following their interests, right? Because I'm sure they all have very different interests.
And parenting makes you a better leader in a professional setting.
What have you found about that?
The close observation, listening, appreciating what motivates one child is very different than what motivates another child. That challenge to be the leader you want them to see.
Yeah, right. So my last question before we wrap is a fun question I like to ask everybody that comes on Best Ever. What's in your ears these days? What or who are you listening to?
I've been listening to the Box Goldberg variations.
Are you working on that?
That's going to be my next song. Is the aria that
get out of here? That's awesome.
And then I'm listening to the Cicero trilogy by Robert Harris, and kind of going down this rabbit hole of Roman history. And then my favorite podcast right now is this podcast called Song Exploder.
Oh yeah, it's really good.
Super,
yeah. Great episode on Stevie Wonder on Song Exploder.
Oh, I'll check it out.
That was one of my great concerts from last year. Was Stevie Wonder?
Wow.
It was amazing. It was amazing. Yeah. Just say a word about the Cicero trilogy and what you're taking away from that.
There's real value in reading the classics and studying the path that another democracy took, and that you can't take democracy for granted.
Right. I think that's a great place to stop. with that thought that we can't take democracy for granted. And you're somebody who has fought for it. And as I say, thank you for that. Thank you for your service, Craig. Thank you so much for being here and sharing so much wisdom with us on Best Ever. It's been a lot of fun to reconnect with you. And thanks for making the time.
Likewise, Scott. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Craig. So let's do some coachable moments. The conversation with Craig had so much in it that you could talk about from a put it to work kind of standpoint that it's hard to choose, 2 or 3 points to make, but let me give it a shot. One thing that really stood out for me with Craig that, is such a unique aspect of his life story is the whole firefight story behind his book, The Unforgiving Minute. And when we were talking about that experience and how difficult it was, he said, in combat, the hits just keep on coming. And you've got to learn to control what you can control. And most of it you can't control. And I think keeping that perspective, most of us are never going to be in combat like Craig was. But, in life, the hits just keep on coming. And there's a lot of extrinsic stuff out there, most of which we can't influence, that can trigger our intrinsic dialogue or monologue more accurately. And I refer to that little monologue as the itty bitty shitty committee. It's that you're triggered by these external factors and there's wah, 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 like the teacher on Charlie Brown. And you've got to recognize when that happens and ask yourself, what's the one best thing that I can do right now? How do I need to show up and what do I need to do that's going to move the ball forward? What can I control? So I thought that was a really important point. Another really important point he made that he learned in Ranger training, and that after we were done with the formal interview, I had a chance to chat with Craig a little bit as we were wrapping up, and he was talking about traveling internationally as chief of staff to his CEO, Jim Anderson, and his CEO is marveling at Craig's ability to just sleep on command, as his CEO describes it. And he said, that's the gift from the Army that's kept on giving. And if you remember, Craig talked about he wants to get at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night because he can't perform well unless he does. So this is one that I'm really passionate about myself, actually. I've in my book, Overworked and Overwhelmed, I talk a lot about the importance of sleep, and I've read a lot of the research. And the research shows that 95% of human beings need at least 7 hours of sleep. That's the minimum. To be not just fully productive the next day, but to live to their full life expectancy. Because if you don't get enough sleep, 7 hours minimum for 95% of us, it leads to chronic illness and chronic disease, which shortens your lifespan and your health span. So if you think you can get by with less than 7 hours of sleep a night and be just fine, well, you must be in the 5% of the population that has a rare genetic mutation that enables you to get by with less. And let me tell you, the math suggests that you're not in the 5%. So be on the safe side, get the 7 hours of sleep a night. Finally, one thing that really kind of pulled through the conversation for me with Craig that I think is worth thinking about and worth thinking about how can you act on this from a self-coaching standpoint is the power of community. Remember the part of the conversation where we talked about the drive that Craig has, and I think pretty much any objective observer would suggest that Craig has, knowing Craig's history and everything he's accomplished in his life thus far, a lot of drive with Craig, right? And is it nature? Is it nurture? It's really both, and he made the point that nobody ever accomplishes great things on their own. The podcaster Scott Galloway likes to talk about agency is in the power of others. And that power of community goes both ways, right? He talked about it in his church as well, the value of the community for him, and not just receiving probably the love and companionship from the folks that he goes to church with, but also giving his own love and companionship. And I think that's a two-way street. It's a give and take scenario with community. So we can all benefit from it, but a big part of the benefit is not just taking what we can get from community, but also thinking about how can we give and contribute to the community. And I think Craig has really thought about that a lot and is exemplary in the way he thinks about that. So I just put that out there for you from a coaching standpoint as food for thought. What communities are you in? And not just what are you taking from those communities, but what can you give and contribute back to those communities? Because that'll do as much for you as the taking will. It's the health and efficacy factors of giving. There's a lot of research on this, are enormous in terms of your overall health and well-being, your effectiveness as a person and a leader. It's all upside. So just look for opportunities to give back to the communities that you're in, as well as being somebody who benefits just from being in those communities. So coachable moments, control what you can control, get enough sleep, 7 hours a minimum, and look for the power of community. And that is it for this episode of Best Ever. Thanks so much for being a part of our community and listening to the show. If you found today's conversation valuable, be sure to follow Best Ever on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review and a comment on this episode. I want to know what's landing with you, and your engagement really helps others discover the show. And if you're looking for more on how self-management fuels lasting leadership impact, connect with me through eblingroup.com. I've learned it takes a village to make a podcast. Thanks to executive producer CeCe Huffman and editor Mark Meyer, both of Wavestream Media. And thanks to my other team members, Lindsay Russell, Mary Moats, Sophia Shum, and Diane Eblin. Best Ever is a production of the Eblin Group. Thanks for listening to Best Ever, and until next time, keep taking those small steps that lead to your best ever outcomes.